Okay, so please note that we do record these meetings, and you can catch up on what you've missed in the community by going to the wiki. And you can also, here's something new we have, relatively new, our YouTube channel. I think it's maybe not brand new, but it's been refurbished recently. It's worth revisiting if you haven't been there in a while. I would say our primary means of communication, though, remain Twitter and Slack. So please join us if you haven't already. Follow us on Twitter, join us on Slack. Before we get into the agenda, why don't we do a quick round of introductions? If you could tell us who you are and what brings you to the meeting today, that would be great. And let's see here. We usually go in the order left to right for the speaker, and so that's me. And first up for me is Ross.
Hey everybody, I'm Ross. I work on the astronomer community team, and I'm here at this meeting to talk about the new Marquez blog, but I join all the meetings just to help and to be useful.
Thanks. Willy.
Hello, everyone. I'm Willy. I'm the co-creator Marquez, also a committer to Open Lineage, and currently I'm a software engineer at Astronomer.
Thanks. Minkyu.
Hi, I'm Minkyu, and I'm a software developer at Astronomer, and I'm also a contributor to Marquez. It's been a long time since last contribution, but yeah, I'm still interested in the community and learning. Yeah.
Thanks. Howard.
Hello, folks. Howard Yu here. I'm a staff product manager in Astronomer. I do work with Open Lineage and also partly with the Marquez project. Very exciting 2 projects. So happy to be here. The reason I'm here is just to, check out the news, recent updates, and share things with you guys. Thank you.
Thank you. And Mike.
Hey, yeah, so I'm a staff software engineer at Astronomer. I'm a contributor to Marquez and to Open Lineage as well. Yeah, just, staying active in the community.
Thanks. Ryan?
Yeah, similar to several other folks, I'm a software engineer at Astronomer. I'm on our support team, so trying to learn more about Open Lineage, Marquez, observability in general. Yeah.
Thanks. And is that everyone? I think so. I'm Michael Robinson, developer relations engineer, also at Astronomer, and I coordinate these meetings. Why don't I try sharing again? There we go. Up for us today, we have announcements followed by an introduction to something new in the community, the Marquez blog, which we're excited to share with you. Also a new segment for our meetings, architecture review. And this month, we're going to be hearing about the so-called current lineage graph. And then we'll end with a discussion. And as part of our open discussion this time, we've got, as a topic, an issue that Howard is going to tell us about. Friendly reminders, we've still got swag available, so check that out if you haven't already. And we don't have a release to talk about this month, but we are kind of narrowly missing 24.0. So you can expect that very soon. We've got some important bug fixes coming your way and some other additions. So keep a lookout for that. Not making any promises, but potentially today.
Yeah, we got to get those votes in. I think we.
Yeah, and I was like, dude, so glad you didn't hit me out. Like, hey man, let's do this.
I was just like meetings and I do this document, and I was like,
hey John,
we've been doing lunch like.
Sorry about that.
It's okay.
Yeah, so votes, I think we have the votes that we need. I was looking before the meeting, could be wrong, but if not, we'll have those soon and should be able to release that very shortly. Yeah. So that's something new in the community as well. We've got a new release process, and you could read more about that on the repo if you're curious. We're making that more public and open. Something else that's new, the Marquez blog, and it's at marquezproject.ai/blog. It's live. It's a little bit small. Currently, we only have one blog post, and we're going to share with you today the way that you can participate, you can contribute to the blog. I was thinking that maybe I could very quickly show off the great design that Ross Turk did for us, if it's not tempting fate to do that. And I think it is. Wait, can you see that? No. Okay. Might not be able to. Wait a second. How about that? You're good?
Hey, there we go.
Okay. Thanks. So all we've got is the one post, and the topic is exploring the Marquez Lineage API. To tell us more about the submission process, if you want to join in, if you want to contribute to the blog, is Ross.
Sure. Here, let me share my screen really quick. Yeah, if you could stop sharing, I'll go ahead and share. Okay, got it. Yeah, so this is a pretty new website in general. The website's only a couple of months old, and the blog is a new section of the website. As Michael said, it only contains one post today, and that post is right here. However, it's really easy to add new posts. There's a repo under the Marquez project organization called website. I should probably address these, although it's a statically generated site, so it's not really a security problem. Anyway, where the blogs belong is in the contents directory under the blog subdirectory. Make a new directory for each blog post right here. Blog posts are written in Markdown. The images are located in the same folder as the blog posts. So the process, if you have an idea for a blog post, actually, let's take a step back. If you have an idea for a blog post that you think is needed, maybe you're not even the right person to write it. In the website repo, we accept issues. There aren't any open ones right now, but I think if you see a need for a blog post that has not yet been written, we welcome issues to just say, I think there needs to be a blog post about this topic. We also welcome pull requests to the website as well with blog posts. That's how the current one got there. And so if you want to just skip the issue process and go straight to pull request and just write a blog post and contribute it, go for it. We're happy to accept blog posts of all kinds. As far as the artwork is concerned, there's two images. There's this banner image at the top, and then there's the image that you have here, and they're different aspect ratios. I'm happy to make the artwork for folks. I use a special tool to make this, and I'm kind of trying to adhere to the color scheme and whatever. And so I'm happy to make art that's similar to this for everybody's blog posts. If you tag me in the PR or the issue, I'll make it for you. I'm also happy to document how I do it. If anybody wants to make this art themselves, I use a tool that I made to build it. So, oh, and incidentally, if anybody doesn't like the art style, I'm happy to discuss that too. So, I guess to summarize, any kind of participation is welcome. Ideas are welcome, posts are welcome, and we'll just use the standard GitHub issues and pull request process for doing it for the time being.
Yeah, Ross, what I can do at least is promise you some issues because I have some ideas on maybe going deeper into the data model of Marquez, and this blog post in particular by Michael, which was really well written, kind of goes into the API, and I think that's very, very needed in the community. But I think more in depth, maybe architecture or just the way we've evolved the data model, and maybe even this. I know, Michael, we talked about the history of Marquez and giving a backstory. So there's like 3 or 4 blog posts just that I can open up issues for, and maybe eventually get to. But yeah, yeah.
Well, the issues are helpful. If you want to just like throw an outline into a doc, if we have ideas, we'll help, so we can make this a collaborative process. I would encourage folks who are interested in blogging not to wait until it's perfect or complete or done to share it. We're happy to have half-written content too, and we'll work with you. And when I say we, I mean the whole Marquez community will work with you.
And I think we already have an issue for a new blog post. Is that possible?
I just did that.
Yeah.
So
right on.
I was going to ask later if someone could help me better understand the relationship between Marquez and Open Lineage. So I figured that would be a helpful blog post.
Yeah, absolutely. And especially because there's some nuance there, like the Open Lineage spec really only is for the Lineage collection, and like Marquez has a different query API. It's different, and there's plenty of nuance to explore there. I think it's a great idea.
Cool.
Very cool indeed. Okay. So I think Ross covered the next slide, and so we can go straight to the architecture review. Willy, if you're ready, would you like to share your own screen, or do you want to use the deck that
I'll go ahead and share my own screen. Yeah. Okay, so maybe before I go into the slides, I did want to show something. The slides that I put together was actually the result of a recent PR that was merged in our docs by Julian Ledem. And he talks about what is the current state, or how do you build the current lineage graph. So my slides are just going to cover in a high level. So if you ever wanted to understand more deeply in how the open lineage events are captured and how we model things on the Marquez backend, this is a pretty good doc that outlines our initial thoughts when we were building out the Lineage API and the lineage model for Marquez, and it goes into a few definitions as well. So I just want to preface it by saying that what I'm going to be talking about is just at a high level how Marquez stores the lineage graph and some of the models that we use as well. All right. So so we're going to go into the data lineage graph for Marquez, but more specifically the current lineage graph. And really, what does that mean? With Marquez, that we now have switched over to processing lineage metadata as open lineage events, and that's capturing metadata for a job under execution at the run level. And so what is Marquez doing on the back end to then surface this lineage metadata and support the APIs that allow you to query the model and see the relationships between jobs and data sets? But before we go into that, what I want to do is just define what a current data lineage graph is, because there's 2 levels here. So when you say current level lineage graph, what does that really mean? At a high level, it's a directed by graph. So you have jobs and data sets. So the nodes, you have nodes for jobs, and those nodes are going to have inputs and outputs. And data sets, they're going to have inputs and outputs as well, but those are in and out edges. So they're the relationships between what is the job that produced that data set, but also what is the jobs downstream that are now reading from that data set. So if we were going to define that, it models as a superposition. How do you say that? Superposition of a lineage graph. So what you're doing is, as jobs run, usually they're going to be within a data pipeline. So you'll have a graph that represents that data pipeline. So you have a map of data pipelines, and then you have a set of trees, and those are just individual graphs that represent one or more data pipelines. So then what that really means is, if you start at any node within the lineage graph, you're able to then traverse and go through that graph itself. So you have this really rich representation of all the different pipelines and how they're connected. And normally on the Marquez backend, they're going to be connected through data set nodes. There's no job to job relationship. Really, we could represent that in that way, but currently the way the lineage graph is built is just based off the job and the inputs and outputs that it produces. The lineage metadata is collected at the run level, and that's done through Open Lineage. And so as jobs execute in, for example, an Airflow DAG, we begin to report metadata around the run state. What is the inputs and outputs of those runs, and specifically, what is the job itself? And so we have information around the run location, or I'm sorry, the job location. What is the schema for a data set? And that's all collected through Open Lineage, and Marquez has a very distinct way to version data sets and jobs as well that we'll go into. So the run level graph really just represents the current lineage graph for a job, J for a given run R. So as a job executes, metadata is reported, but over time, so does the definition of that job. So nodes are added, for example, because the job has a new input data set, or it's writing to a new table. So now it has an edge connecting from the job node to the dataset node. And that's just because maybe a job is writing to a new table. And so the last point here, the run level lineage is derived from Open Lineage events. And what that really means is as the job is executing, we're just tracking all of the different changes that are happening and metadata that is now associated with that run. But it's also on the back end, Marquez is then versioning the job itself. So as new information is being reported, like I mentioned, you're going to have changes that happen on the back end, and that the versioning functions are applied to the job and associated with that run. And when a job is complete, it will then begin to version or create a new version and begin to version the inputs and outputs. Let me see in the next. So what that really means when you have this run level lineage, this is the general model that you have. So when an Open Lineage event is reported, you have a unique ID, and that allows us on the Marquez backend to stitch together all these events that are being reported, because an Open Lineage event has different states. So first you start the run, there's transformations that happen that we don't capture, but then a job completes, and then the integrations that we have with Spark and Airflow and a few others, they begin to then report a job complete event. And Marquez then says, okay, great, I have a complete event, and let me begin to start versioning the information that I received. And one example of that is that when the complete event is received, Marquez then creates a job version and then associates the input dataset versions and output dataset versions to that job version. And then it ties it to the run itself. So what you get is this multi-dimensional model that at any given time, you're able to see possibly what was the lineage graph or at the run level for job version 1. And then as the job definition changes, so the code changes and possibly the inputs and outputs, you have this really rich model that you can then query, and Marquez keeps track of that behind the scenes. And at a high level, you kind of see here, there was that question, or what's the difference between Open Lineage and Marquez? And so that issue that we saw about what is the relationship. You see that you have jobs, datasets, and runs, and also sources that Marquez captures, which is very similar to the Open Lineage event spec, but that the uniqueness is the job versioning and dataset versioning. So if you look at the top right, you have a job, so that that's your job in Airflow, your job in Spark. And when Marquez sees that, it's going to then start putting together the current input and output details and associate that job version with the data set. So you could have a job could have more than just one job version. So you could have it's a one-to-many relationship there. And then we associate the runs to the job version. So a job version will have more than just one run, because you can push new code out to production, and that could run for a week. So you have multiple runs associated with that job version. And as a run executes, it's going to have a dataset version as its input. So those are all versioned inputs. And when a run completes, so when we receive that open lineage event that the run has completed, we then complete the run, create a job version, and also associate the output datasets that are now versioned to the job version itself. And for every dataset, then you have different sources like warehouses, if you're using Redshift or if you're using Postgres or anything like that, and even Snowflake, we're able to associate those datasets to the source itself. And the question becomes, okay, well, now you have all this run level information that's associated with the job. How do you derive the current level lineage? So it's actually derived from the run level graph. So you have multiple graphs that are now associated with a run itself. So at any given point, you can query the Marquez model. Currently, the API just allows you to query the latest run, but it's really the run level itself is just one layer below the current level. So it's really just what is the latest run level graph for all the job nodes that you have within the backend. So that just represents the current version of the lineage graph itself. So yeah, that's generally kind of what's happening behind the scenes. And if you look at the bottom here, for every job you have a job ID, which is globally unique. And the way we do that is just namespace plus job name. You have an array of inputs and outputs. And those are just going to be representing the latest version of the data set that you're consuming. And same thing for the output. You have an array of output data sets that you produce, but those are just the latest version. So the idea here is as job runs occur, new edges get added and new versioning also gets applied. But in the end, you just get the view of the current graph, and all the versions themselves are just now pointing to the latest version, and then you have a rich lineage graph. And that's really what's happening here. If you go to, I have a local host over here. I have Marquez running on the back end. So here you can see that there, if I click on a dataset node, this is a job node. You can see the latest run. This is completed, and there's run history. So here we only completed one run, but if I ran this multiple times, and let's say the next run added a dataset output, it would then create this extra node that this ETL categories job now points to. And if I click on here, you'll also see there's the latest schema, but the versioning history as well. So with in this case, we're just showing what the latest job and latest dataset version are, and that's how we build the lineage graph itself. And currently, if you query the Lineage API, we're just pointing to the latest version of those jobs and datasets. But that also gives you an insight into what you can do. There's something around time travel. So if you can imagine, if you have all these versions, you can possibly go back in time and say, what was the lineage graph representation for a job run about 2 weeks ago or a month ago? What we end up doing on the Marquez backend, we just display the latest. So if nodes are removed or nodes are added, you'll always get the current snapshot or the current representation of the lineage graph itself. And this is all built using the open lineage spec, and all those events are coming in. Marquez is able to take those events, merge them together, and be able to build up the lineage graph on the back end. So that was a quick overview. I can't leave it open for questions, but I wanted to at least show you how Marquez uses open lineage to build the current lineage graph using run level lineage metadata collected by open lineage. Was that helpful? With any part?
Yes.
Okay.
I just have a question. So does it mean that like before the job is completed, you won't be seeing like a dataset, version attached to it. So any running jobs, like non-complete jobs or any jobs that failed and did not reach the complete stages, wouldn't have the dataset as its metadata.
That's correct. In the case of a failed state, there was discussions that we had in the past because it would be kind of confusing if a job ran and it's in a failed state. So there's two scenarios there. One, the job executed and never completed. So that way, in that case, there's really no output data set. Now, if a job ran, it completed, and eventually down the road it failed, we don't remove that node. There was discussions in the past around, do we keep that node or do we not? But it should show up in the graph itself. But for the first time running, you won't see that metadata. The job has to complete for the versioning logic to be applied and eventually displayed on the graph itself.
Okay, thank you.
So a job version represents a link to the actual code that ran for that job. Is that right?
Yes, that's correct. So if it's provided as a source location facet that's associated with the job, Marquez will take that source location and determine if the source has changed. So normally it's a pointer to a git SHA in GitHub or any other version control that you're using. So if you provide that link and there's version control that you have, maybe it's in-house or it's a public offering that you're using, that's what Marquez uses. So there's three ways, there's three ways. One, if the inputs change, that's a new version. The outputs change, that's also a new version. And if the source location changes, we've kind of kept it fairly simple. We haven't, once we kind of decided that that's the versioning that will apply to job metadata, that's kind of how it stood. But there are ways that we can evolve that. With the dataset version, all we look at currently is if we, there's two cases there. If the schema changes, and there's actually a unique case that Howard will be talking about in the issue that he opened up recently. But if the schema changes, we keep track of the columns and which ones have changed. And also, when a job run completes, there's an assumption that Marquez makes on the back end that it touched that data set in some way, and it will create a new data set version. So for every completed run, we will then create a new data set version for the output data sets for that run, and then tie that to the job version. Good question, though.
Yeah, thank you very much, Willy and Howard and Ryan.
Yeah, thank you.
Looking forward to future architecture reviews. And now it's time to turn to open discussion. And we have one item on our discussion agenda, and we can start with that, Howard, if you're amenable.
Yeah, let me just share my screen. This is just this is nothing really that like complicated or anything like that, but I think it's a pretty interesting kind of an issue, and I hope Marquez will be able to resolve this issue so that it becomes more robust and reliable. So issue number 2048. I like that ID. It's 2K, right? The problem statement is I was actually testing Marquez using my custom extractor and my custom operator. So this normally doesn't happen with any existing Postgres SQL operators or any Spark operators, etc., because they all get the metadata using the database connections. So what happens is that when the Marquez job finishes, the Marquez actually retrieves the full metadata of a table through the database connection. But my custom extractor wasn't doing that. And so instead, it was actually receiving or try to create like a metadata schema, not using the database connection at all. So what ended was that anytime it had the metadata existing in some sort of a query language, it was able to create those metadata, properly. So you see here that the 7 fields were created right at this moment. But then again, there's another statements where it doesn't really have that full metadata. It only has the name of the table, and when that happens, the field portion of the data set information that's being submitted to the Marquez is actually 0. Obviously, it's empty. So, and Marquez actually assumes that that's going to be the next new schema, that it needs to override the existing one. So what happens is, as you can see in here, you get like a new version of the schema or the metadata that has a 0 field count. Now, this is problematic because this is never intended, and one of the conundrums that I faced was I have to, like, each time I submit like a new event, I have to also put the full metadata into the field, even though it's simply just referring to. So rather than doing that, this is what I would like to propose, that since the empty field in the table itself doesn't really mean anything, whenever the Marquez actually receives these kind of empty fielded tables, rather than just overriding the existing version of the data set, it should actually try to reuse it. In 2 cases, like, first of all, check for the latest version of the given data set under the same namespace and schema name. And if it does not exist, if any previous version did not exist, then populate the initial version as is with 0 fields. So that's fine. But if there exists any previous data set in the version, then please try to reuse that instead of creating a new version of the data set. So this kind of, lays out the logic of making data consumption a little bit more robust when in edge cases where the field data is not available. So, I mean, the assumption is that probably this event is not trying to, wipe out the metadata information, but rather due to some reasons, it didn't really have enough information. So it's only providing the table name. And in that case, Marquez should honor the existing latest version, then try to override it. So basically, this would be a new logic that would take place at the end of the complete event. And when the Marquez is evaluating the data sets and trying to come up with the versions, if it sees these kind of an empty fields, then we should have a little bit of a logic to just reuse the latest version instead of overriding. So pretty much that's kind of a gist of this issue, and it's just been released like yesterday. I hope this would get worked on and be part of the existing Marquez functionalities. So, I mean, I hope this makes sense. And yeah, thank you.
No, I for one think it absolutely makes sense. It's more how we want to communicate it to. So the way Marquez was vision is that it just accepts events as they come in, and it doesn't have much it just assumes that whatever the user is providing, that's the current state. So you could view Marquez as just a log of metadata that it's collecting and storing. Now this is a very interesting edge case, and the way Marquez does the versioning, yeah, it does look at the fields and okay, it's empty, but it always compares it to the previous. So if the previous had 7 and it's looking at the current version and it differs, then it's going to create a new version. It's something that we talked a little bit offline, Howard, about this issue. I would love to have nulls supported. So really, if Marquez receives a null, that means it just doesn't, it's the caller is telling Marquez, I don't know any information about the schema. So a null would better represent that it just doesn't know or it didn't capture the schema versus an empty set. But I don't know. That's kind of where my head is. We could easily put in a check that says, okay, if this is an empty array of fields, and the previous one had something, then we can just go ahead and ignore it. But Marquez will then be making a big assumption. So I would like to follow the path where maybe the open lineage integration can provide null versus an empty array. That would be the more ideal approach.
Yeah. So checking the open lineage spec, the field is actually not an optional. So right now, I mean, like, even though we explicitly set the fields as null or none, it's going to recreate the empty array during its init. We have to change that in order to support this, and that's like changing the specification of the open lineage. If that's possible, then it should be fine, I guess. I don't really see why not. Like, having a null on the fields wouldn't really break anything, in my opinion. But then again, I mean, like, I think in general, like, when there's a table that has an empty fields, I don't think it should override anything at all. You know what I'm saying? I think it should just, value whatever that exists, because that's not even a legal case. And I think the checking routine will be pretty quick, where we'll just, rather than comparing each of the values, we'll just get a length of the array, field array, and if it's a 0, then we'd consider that as a similar to the null value. The only exception would be when it first arrives, like without any previous versions, right? Then it might make sense to temporarily, create a data set with the empty fields. That's just fine, but I think for all the other reasons, like for example, like when there's an existing table schema with the versions and the columns with it, then and then you see like an empty fields table, it actually doesn't make really any sense at all. So I think it's okay. I mean, like, it's not a big assumption. It's actually fairly like reasonable thing to do for the Marquez. Yeah, I mean, like, and technically it's possible to switch the optional, like add like an optional as a field in the open lineage spec. So could be either way.
Yeah, I guess whatever we decide to do, very similar on the job side. If you have a job that initially has maybe 2 outputs, but then you get an empty array of outputs, should it be applied the same way? Or so that's kind of where I'm getting at. How many if else should you add to the versioning, and how much exceptions are we putting into the code base around it? It'd be interesting to see or to hear what other people think, because I kind of stated how I feel about it. It's true. It's not a difficult change to make. It's, how many if else checks do we want in the code base, where we could maybe make this a little bit easier and rely more on what the users are providing us. Yeah,
definitely agree. So so folks, it's a issue 2048. If you guys have any like comments or any feedbacks that would help us to make some decisions, then yeah, please feel free to enter in. And thank you.
Okay, thank you, Howard. Anyone else have questions or comments?
I do think that, and I know this has been touched on, but I do think that like the idea that we should be able to differentiate between the integration sending a null value or like no schema, and there being a problem with the integration resulting in an empty field, should be in some way like that should be something that we can that is distinguishable from the event itself, as opposed to just having to infer based on what's happened. But I'm not sure what the best approach would be for that. I know Howard and Willy both had some good ideas.
Yeah. I mean, that's true. We should definitely do something about this. That's one thing. But I mean, like I think both ways can be done. So
Yeah, Howard, yeah, just thanks again for opening up the issue. I think what we need in terms of resolving it, I think just a little bit more input, and as long as we get a reasonable consensus on how it should be applied, and maybe there's, on the open lineage side, there might be a timeline in terms of maybe sending a null for the schema, but as an interim, we could also add this to Marquez and just kind of link out to the issue. Oh, by the way, this should be addressed in a different way, because I know that is not a good experience to have. So there's a quick route, and then there's more of a long term how we want to do this. And I think we get to a pretty quick solution. That way, our users don't experience this.
yeah, totally.
And if you in using Marquez run into your own edge case, maybe you're creating a custom extractor or not, please feel free to reach out. We'd love to have you ask your question at a future meeting. Speaking of which, our next one, I believe, is scheduled for August 25th. And you'll be hearing about at least one Marquez release. I can promise that. Can't promise when it'll happen, but I can promise that. We'll look forward to seeing you then, hopefully. Have a great rest of your day.
Thanks. Good meeting, everyone.
All right, later.
See you
guys
folks.
later. Bye.
Bye.
See you guys.